He paid for a housekeeper and got a fierce outcast instead, then realized she was the perfect fit. Daniel had always thought of himself as a capable man. He ran a small business, managed his finances carefully, and lived a comfortable life in a quiet neighborhood. On the outside, everything seemed perfect, but inside, Daniel was struggling. Despite his successes, he felt overwhelmed by the everyday chores that came with managing a home on his own. Laundry piled up in corners, dishes were left in the sink, and dust seemed to gather faster than he could clean it. It was a constant, quiet frustration that made him feel as if his life was slightly out of control, no matter how well he managed his work or finances. He tried to keep up. Early mornings were spent washing clothes and tidying up the kitchen. Late nights were often filled with scrubbing floors and organizing cupboards. Yet no matter how much effort he put in, the house never seemed truly organized. Daniel was meticulous, but he lacked time and energy, and he knew he needed help. After a particularly exhausting week, Daniel sat in his living room, staring at the scattered papers on the coffee table and the dishes stacked in the sink. He realized that he could not continue like this. The solution was simple: hire someone to help. Someone capable, reliable, and unobtrusive. A housekeeper. Daniel began looking online for candidates. He scrolled through profiles, each one promising professionalism, experience, and discretion. He contacted several candidates, setting up interviews one by one. But after each meeting, he felt dissatisfied. One candidate was polite but too quiet, seeming uncomfortable with the idea of doing any real work. Another was overly talkative and distracted, focusing more on chatting than on the job. One appeared neat and proper but seemed rigid and unwilling to adapt to the needs of his household. Each candidate had something to offer, but none felt like the right fit. He was beginning to lose hope when a neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, mentioned someone she knew. "You might want to meet Mara," she said, lowering her voice slightly. "She's a little unusual, but she knows how to get things done. I think you might be surprised." Thompson's words made him curious. Mara's reputation as a bit of an outcast worried him, but he was also desperate for someone capable. After a moment's thought, he decided to call her. The day Mara arrived for the interview, Daniel felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The moment she stepped into his home, it became clear that she was nothing like the other candidates. Mara was tall and strong, with sharp eyes that seemed to study everything at once. She carried herself with confidence, almost bordering on defiance. Her clothing was simple, practical, but somehow different. Something about her made her stand out immediately. When she greeted him, it was with a curt nod rather than a smile. She got straight to the point, asking detailed questions about the house, the chores, and his expectations. Daniel felt slightly uncomfortable, as if he were being examined instead of the other way around. Yet beneath her stern exterior, there was a clarity and precision he could not ignore. She seemed competent, capable, and unafraid to speak her mind. Despite his reservations, Daniel decided to hire her. Mara accepted without hesitation, saying simply, "I'll start Monday." No promises, no explanations, no small talk. Just a straightforward acceptance. That night, Daniel went to bed with mixed feelings. Relief that he would finally have help, but also unease. He could not shake the feeling that hiring Mara might be a mistake. She was loud, different, and unpredictable, but there was no turning back now. Monday arrived and Mara came to work. From the first moment she stepped into his home, Daniel knew things would not be simple. Mara moved with purpose, examining every corner, opening drawers, looking behind furniture. She asked questions about why things were arranged a certain way and immediately suggested improvements. "Why is this here?" she asked, pointing at a stack of papers on the coffee table. Daniel began to explain, but she interrupted gently. "No, this isn't efficient. Let's fix it." Who was this woman, and why did she act as if she had run the house for years? Over the next few days, Mara worked tirelessly. She cleaned, organized, and made small adjustments to improve efficiency. She created systems for laundry, dishes, and even the kitchen. Yet she did not follow Daniel's routines. She established her own rules, which sometimes conflicted with his habits. She rearranged the living room, suggested new ways to store kitchen items, and even gave him advice on his daily schedule. At first, Daniel felt frustrated. He wanted someone quiet and obedient, not someone who would challenge every little detail of his life. But slowly, he began to notice changes. The house felt cleaner, lighter, and more organized than it ever had before. The air felt fresher, the rooms more open, and even the clutter seemed less overwhelming. Mara's presence, while challenging at times, was undeniably effective. She had a way of transforming the home with energy and precision that Daniel could not have achieved alone. One evening, he walked into the kitchen to find Mara humming softly as she worked. She was folding laundry and organizing shelves, her movements deliberate and confident. For the first time, Daniel noticed something deeper beneath her fierce exterior. Mara cared about her work. She was not just cleaning, she was creating order, efficiency, and harmony. Daniel realized that he had underestimated her. Her bluntness and strength, which had seemed off-putting at first, were precisely what made her effective. She was fearless, unafraid to take control, and committed to doing things properly. By the end of the first week, Daniel felt a cautious respect for Mara. His house had transformed in ways he had never imagined possible. Yet he still struggled with the fact that she was so different from anyone he had ever employed. She challenged him, forced him to reconsider his habits, and disrupted his comfort zone. But at the same time, she was undeniably the right person for the job. Daniel began to see that sometimes the right person for a role was not the one who fit neatly into expectations, but the one who brought a new perspective and new energy. Mara's fierceness, independence, and skill were exactly what his home needed. As the days passed, small moments continued to reveal her character. She had a sharp sense of observation, noticing things Daniel had overlooked for years. She found ways to make daily routines more efficient, organized items in ways that made sense to her, and even offered practical advice when he faced small personal dilemmas. One morning, Daniel found Mara in the living room, arranging books on a shelf he had never noticed needed organizing. She looked up, smiled briefly, and said, "This makes it easier to find things, doesn't it?" For the first time, Daniel realized that her way of doing things, though different from his, was actually better. It was efficient, practical, and thoughtful. By the end of the second week, the tension he had felt in the beginning began to fade. He was still adjusting to her strong personality, but he could not deny the results. His home was more organized, functional, and comfortable than it had ever been. He even started to enjoy small moments when Mara was working nearby, her energy and focus filling the space with life. Daniel began to reflect on his initial hesitation. He had expected a quiet, obedient housekeeper, someone who would follow instructions without question. Instead, he had found someone strong, independent, and assertive. Someone who challenged him but also improved his life in ways he could not have imagined. That realization stayed with him as he went to bed each night. Mara had arrived as a stranger, a fierce outcast in the eyes of the neighborhood, but she was quickly proving herself to be indispensable. Daniel understood that sometimes, what we need most is not what we expect, but what challenges us, pushes us, and ultimately changes our lives for the better. By the end of the month, Daniel no longer saw Mara as a potential problem. She had become an essential part of the household, bringing order, efficiency, and a sense of life he had never experienced before. He realized that hiring her was not a mistake. It was one of the best decisions he had ever made. And yet, he knew that the real journey was just beginning. Mara was not someone who could be easily understood or managed. She had her own rules, her own personality, and her own ways of doing things. But Daniel felt ready to learn, adapt, and grow alongside her, knowing that together, they could create a home that was not only clean and organized but full of energy, respect, and understanding. From the very first week, Daniel noticed that Mara's presence in the house was impossible to ignore. Unlike the quiet, obedient help he had imagined hiring, Mara was loud, confident, and bold. She did not tiptoe around the house. Instead, she moved with purpose, inspecting everything, asking pointed questions, and speaking her mind. At first, Daniel found it exhausting. He had expected someone who would quietly follow his instructions, not challenge his every choice. It started with small things. Mara rearranged the kitchen cupboards to make them more efficient. She moved the plates, glasses, and utensils to places she felt made more sense. When Daniel questioned her about it, she looked at him with a calm, unwavering gaze. "You'll thank me later," she said simply, brushing off his concerns. Daniel wanted to protest, but he could not deny the logic in her choices. Slowly, he began to realize that she was improving the efficiency of his home in ways he had never thought possible. Still, it was difficult for him to accept that someone could do things differently from the way he had always done them. Laundry was another point of tension. Daniel had a habit of folding clothes in a certain way, which he considered neat and proper. Mara, however, had her own system. She folded shirts and pants differently, sorted items according to her own categories, and even suggested some of his favorite sweaters be kept in storage to save space. Daniel felt a twinge of irritation. He had been doing it his way for years. Why should he change now? But then, a week later, he noticed something remarkable. The clothes that Mara had folded never came out wrinkled. They were easy to find, and the storage system she implemented made his mornings smoother. Daniel found himself hesitating before arguing with her. Perhaps her method was better, even if it was not what he was used to. The friction between them, however, was not limited to chores. Mara had a sharp, blunt personality. She would ask direct questions about Daniel's habits, his work schedule, and even his lifestyle choices. When she noticed that he often skipped breakfast, she confronted him one morning. "You need to eat something in the morning," she said, placing a plate of toast and fruit on the table. "You can't run your day properly on an empty stomach." Still, living with someone so strong-willed was not always easy. Mara would speak loudly when giving instructions, and she sometimes moved objects without asking, claiming she was organizing the space better. Daniel struggled with letting go of control. He was accustomed to managing everything himself, and having someone who challenged him at every turn was unsettling. Despite the tension, Daniel could not ignore the improvements Mara was making. The house was cleaner, more organized, and ran more smoothly than it had in years. Dishes were no longer left in the sink, laundry was folded and stored efficiently, and even the grocery list was more organized and practical. Mara's unconventional methods were making a visible difference. One afternoon, Daniel watched Mara reorganize the pantry. She took out cans, jars, and boxes, sorting them into neat rows. She stacked items according to size and frequency of use, moving some older items to the front and others to the back. Daniel initially wanted to step in and tell her not to touch certain things, but he stopped himself. The pantry looked better than it ever had before. He realized that her approach, though different from his, was more functional and practical. Mara noticed his hesitation and smiled slightly. "You're learning to let go," she said, almost teasingly. Daniel felt a mix of embarrassment and admiration. She was right. He was learning to trust her judgment, even if it challenged his own instincts. The tension between them also had moments of humor. Mara had a habit of speaking exactly what she thought without sugarcoating her words. When Daniel complained about a broken appliance, she simply said, "Well, you didn't maintain it properly. That's why it's broken." At first, Daniel felt offended, but over time he began to laugh at her bluntness. Her honesty was refreshing, even if it was sometimes uncomfortable. Another challenge came with time management. Daniel had a habit of procrastinating small tasks, leaving things for later, which often created chaos in his home. Mara, on the other hand, worked efficiently, addressing tasks immediately and refusing to leave things half done. At first, Daniel felt pressured by her pace. He was used to moving at his own speed. But soon, he noticed that the house remained in order, and the overall stress of daily chores had decreased. He began to admire her discipline and energy. Over the next few weeks, Mara continued to integrate herself into the household. She created systems that made life easier, schedules for cleaning, designated spots for items, and even small routines for Daniel to follow. She asked questions that made him think about his own habits. Why did he leave his shoes in the hallway instead of storing them neatly? Why did he keep so many items he never used? Daniel realized that her questions were not meant to criticize, but to improve the overall environment of the home. One rainy afternoon, Daniel found Mara sitting at the dining table, quietly reading a manual on home organization. She looked up and said, "Even small improvements matter. A clean and organized home makes life easier, more peaceful." Daniel was struck by her words. They were simple, but they held truth he had not considered before. Mara's dedication was more than just about cleaning. It was about creating harmony and order in life. Despite the growing respect he had for her, Daniel sometimes felt frustrated by her strong personality. Mara did not follow social conventions. She was direct, sometimes impatient, and unapologetically herself. Some neighbors had warned him about her fierce nature, and he had initially feared conflicts. Yet, as he observed her, he realized that her intensity came from care and dedication rather than malice. One evening, Daniel faced a particularly stressful day at work. He returned home exhausted and overwhelmed, expecting to find chores undone and more problems waiting for him. Instead, he found Mara had already completed most tasks. The house was clean, the laundry folded, and dinner was prepared. She handed him a cup of tea and simply said, "Sit down. You need a break." She was not just a housekeeper. She was someone who noticed his well-being and acted to make his life easier. It was a small gesture, but it left a lasting impression. Slowly, Daniel began to see Mara in a new light. Her bluntness, her fierceness, her refusal to follow social norms, all of these traits that had initially unsettled him, were the very things that made her effective. She brought a kind of energy and order to his home that he could not have achieved on his own. Over time, they began to develop a rhythm together. Mara respected certain boundaries while asserting control over tasks that needed structure. Daniel learned to step back and trust her judgment, realizing that her methods were practical and efficient. They began to communicate more openly, sharing thoughts on how to improve the household, and finding common ground despite their differences. One morning, Daniel noticed Mara humming while arranging the living room. The room looked brighter, cleaner, and more welcoming. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, pride, perhaps, that someone had transformed his home in such a positive way. Mara looked at him and smiled briefly, as if acknowledging his silent admiration. That small smile marked a turning point. Daniel realized that Mara's presence, while challenging at times, had brought life, energy, and order to his home in ways he had never imagined. By the end of the month, Daniel could no longer deny that Mara was making a real difference. The house was no longer just a place to live. It had become a home where he felt comfortable, organized, and cared for. Mara's methods, once frustrating, had proven their value. Her fierce, independent personality, which had initially seemed like a challenge, was now a source of strength and efficiency. Daniel reflected on his initial hesitation when hiring Mara. He had expected a quiet, obedient helper. Instead, he had found someone strong, direct, and unconventional. At first, he had been uncertain, even frustrated. But now, he understood that she was the perfect fit for his life, not in spite of her differences, but because of them. He realized that life often surprises us. The people we least expect to make a difference can become the ones who change everything for the better. Mara was not what he had imagined when he decided to hire a housekeeper, but she was exactly what he needed. Her presence challenged him, her methods improved his life, and her dedication brought harmony to his home. Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had learned that accepting someone's differences, even when they are bold and unconventional, can lead to unexpected benefits. Mara had not only organized his home, but had also begun to change his perspective on life, teaching him that structure, discipline, and care could come in many forms. And yet, he knew that this was only the beginning. Mara's personality, strong and independent, would continue to test him. There would be moments of tension, frustration, and adjustment, but Daniel now felt ready. He had seen the value in her methods, the sincerity in her actions, and the care beneath her fierce exterior. The house had become more than just a home. It had become a place where differences were respected, strengths were recognized, and life could be managed with energy and efficiency. Daniel went to bed that night with a sense of calm he had not felt in years. Mara had arrived as a stranger, a fierce outcast in the eyes of the neighborhood, yet she was quickly proving herself to be indispensable. He was beginning to understand that sometimes, the people who seem most different from us are the ones who bring the greatest change, and that accepting them can lead to a better, more balanced life. Daniel had been living with Mara for several weeks now, and the initial tension between them had begun to settle into a cautious understanding. While her bold personality still startled him from time to time, he could not deny the positive changes she had brought to his home. The house was cleaner, more organized, and felt lighter than it had in years. Yet, he knew he had only scratched the surface of what Mara was capable of. One morning, Daniel woke up feeling unusually exhausted. He had been working late the night before, finalizing a business deal that had taken more energy than he had anticipated. As he attempted to get out of bed, a sharp pain in his back made him wince. By mid-morning, he realized he was too unwell to continue with his usual routines. He had a fever and his body ached. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt completely helpless. Mara noticed immediately. When she entered the kitchen to prepare breakfast, she found Daniel slumped over the table, pale and shivering. Her eyes narrowed, not with anger but with concern. "You're not well," she said bluntly. "You need to rest. Leave everything to me." Yet Mara's tone was not one that demanded obedience. It was filled with authority and reassurance. He nodded weakly, realizing he had no choice but to trust her. Over the next few days, Mara transformed the household. She prepared meals, cleaned the house, and even handled Daniel's personal tasks. She reminded him to take his medication, kept his room warm, and ensured he had everything he needed without being asked. Daniel watched in amazement as Mara managed the home with incredible efficiency and care. Tasks he had struggled to complete for years were handled effortlessly. It was during these days of illness that Daniel began to see Mara in a completely new light. Her bluntness and fierceness, which had once irritated him, were now qualities he admired. She was fearless, resourceful, and unafraid to take control when it was needed most. He realized that her presence was not just about cleaning or organizing. It was about creating stability and security in his life. One afternoon, while Daniel rested in his room, he overheard Mara speaking to herself in the kitchen. She was arranging the shelves and inventory in the pantry, humming quietly as she worked. "Everything should be in order," she muttered. "A home functions better when it's organized." Daniel smiled faintly, touched by her dedication. Even in his weakened state, he could see how much thought and care she put into her work. As he began to recover, Daniel noticed small gestures that Mara had made which went beyond her responsibilities as a housekeeper. She had left a bowl of fresh fruit on the counter, cleaned his favorite chair, and even placed a book he had wanted to read on his bedside table. Each act, while simple, reflected a deep awareness of his needs and comfort. Daniel realized that Mara's fierceness was paired with kindness. She cared in her own unique way. When he finally felt well enough to get out of bed, Daniel attempted to resume some of his daily tasks. Mara, however, refused to let him overexert himself. "Slowly," she said firmly. "You've been sick. No need to rush." At first, he felt a flicker of irritation, but then he recognized the truth in her words. Her insistence was not controlling, it was protective. It was during this period of dependence that Daniel also learned more about Mara's past. One evening, while he was sitting at the kitchen table, he asked casually, "How did you learn all these skills?" "You're incredible at managing a household." Mara paused, then began to speak slowly at first about her life. She told him about her childhood in a small town where she had learned to be independent from a young age. She had faced difficulties, family struggles, social rejection, and people who underestimated her abilities. Her bluntness and fierceness, she explained, were born out of necessity, not malice. "I had to rely on myself," she said quietly. "I had no choice but to be strong and resourceful." Her independence and strength, which had once unsettled him, now seemed admirable. He realized that Mara's personality was a reflection of her life experiences, and that her unconventional methods were rooted in intelligence and practicality. The turning point came one morning when Daniel faced a sudden crisis. A pipe had burst in the bathroom, flooding the floor and threatening to damage the furniture. Daniel, still recovering from his illness, felt panic rising. He had no idea how to fix it and felt helpless as water spread across the tiles. Mara, however, sprang into action immediately. She grabbed towels, shut off the main water supply, and began assessing the situation. Within minutes, she had controlled the flooding and was directing Daniel on how to manage minor repairs. Her calm, confident approach transformed a potentially disastrous situation into a manageable one. Daniel watched in awe as she worked efficiently and decisively. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that Mara was capable of handling far more than he had ever imagined. After the crisis was resolved, Daniel sat down with Mara, gratitude evident in his eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he admitted. Mara simply shrugged. "You don't have to, that's why I'm here." Her words were simple, yet powerful. She had not only saved the house, but also given Daniel peace of mind. From that day forward, Daniel's respect for Mara deepened. He began to see her as more than a housekeeper. She was a partner in maintaining the home, someone whose skills and judgment were invaluable. He started to trust her instincts completely, realizing that her methods, while different from his own, produced the best results. Mara also continued to demonstrate qualities that went beyond household management. She encouraged Daniel to take better care of himself, suggesting small routines for exercise and nutrition. She noticed when he seemed stressed or distracted and offered quiet support. Her presence became a source of stability in a life that had often felt chaotic. Their relationship evolved naturally. Daniel found himself enjoying Mara's company, appreciating her honesty, humor, and intelligence. Mara, in turn, seemed to relax around him, sharing small stories and insights about her life. Despite her fierce exterior, Daniel began to see a softer side, someone who cared deeply and worked tirelessly to make a difference in the lives of those around her. One evening, as they were cleaning the living room together, Daniel remarked, "You have a way of making everything seem easier, Mara. I don't know how you do it." Mara looked at him and smiled faintly. "It's not about making it easy," she replied. "It's about making it right." Daniel reflected on her words. They were simple, yet they held a truth he had been slow to understand. Mara's approach was not about convenience, it was about creating order, efficiency, and care. Over time, Daniel noticed that the house had changed in ways he had never anticipated. It was not just cleaner or more organized, it felt alive. There was energy in the rooms, a sense of harmony and balance. Mara had brought structure, efficiency, and care to every corner of the home, transforming it into a space that was both functional and welcoming. Daniel also realized that his own life had begun to change. He had become more patient, more open to new ideas, and more willing to trust others. Mara's presence had taught him that control was not always necessary, and that sometimes letting someone else lead could result in better outcomes. Her strength and resourcefulness had become a model for him, showing that true efficiency and care required courage and decisiveness. As the weeks passed, the bond between them grew stronger. Mara's fierce personality, once intimidating, became a source of inspiration. Daniel learned to respect her boundaries, her methods, and her perspective. He understood that her unconventional approach was precisely what his household needed. One afternoon, Daniel caught Mara humming softly as she organized the pantry once again. The room was bright and orderly, and the simple sound of her voice brought a sense of calm to the home. Daniel realized that he no longer saw her as an outcast or a difficult presence. She was the perfect fit for his life. Her dedication, intelligence, and care had transformed not only the house but also his perspective. That evening, Daniel sat quietly, reflecting on the events of the past month. Mara had arrived as a stranger, someone fierce and unconventional, and yet she had proven herself indispensable. She had managed crises, cared for him during illness, and brought order and efficiency to his home. More importantly, she had challenged him, taught him patience, and shown him the value of trusting others. For the first time, Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude. Mara's presence had changed his life, not just by organizing his home, but by teaching him lessons about trust, resilience, and understanding. He realized that sometimes, the people who seem most different from us are the ones who bring the greatest positive change. As he went to bed that night, Daniel knew one thing with certainty. Mara was more than just a housekeeper. She was a partner, a guide, and a force of positive change in his life. Her fierce personality, once a source of tension, had become a source of strength. He felt a quiet excitement for the days ahead, knowing that with Mara by his side, his home, and his life would continue to thrive in ways he had never imagined. After the crisis with the burst pipe and Daniel's illness, the household settled into a new rhythm. Daniel had come to rely on Mara in ways he had never expected, and Mara's fierce efficiency was no longer intimidating. It had become a source of reassurance. The tension that had existed during her first weeks gradually softened into mutual respect, and small moments of connection began to emerge. Mara continued her work with relentless dedication. She cleaned, organized, and managed the household with an energy that Daniel could barely keep up with. Yet, she also began to pay attention to the small details that made the home more comfortable. She noticed the way Daniel liked his coffee in the morning, the angle of the living room chairs, the placement of his favorite books. Every adjustment, every little touch, reflected her growing understanding of him, not just as an employer but as a person. Daniel, for his part, began to notice Mara's subtle gestures. One evening, he returned from work to find that she had prepared a simple dinner and left a clean towel on the bathroom counter. There was no announcement, no expectation of thanks, just quiet thoughtfulness. He felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time, he realized that Mara's care extended beyond chores. She genuinely cared about his comfort and well-being. Their conversations began to change as well. In the past, Mara had spoken only when necessary, her words blunt and practical. Now she started sharing small stories about her life, her experiences, and her thoughts on everyday matters. Daniel found himself listening with genuine interest. He had always been self-reliant and private, yet Mara's presence made it easy for him to open up. One afternoon, while arranging the bookshelves together, Daniel asked, "Mara, do you ever get tired of all this work? You're constantly moving, organizing, and planning. Purpose is everything. Even small actions can matter if you do them with care." Mara had a way of seeing problems clearly and offering solutions without unnecessary words. One weekend, Daniel decided to take a day off and spend time with Mara in a more relaxed setting. He suggested they reorganize the garden together. Mara agreed, though she immediately began making suggestions that challenged Daniel's ideas. At first, he felt a familiar resistance, but as they worked side by side, he noticed how much better her suggestions were. Plants were positioned for sunlight, the tools were arranged efficiently, and the space began to feel open and harmonious. As they worked, they laughed at small mistakes, shared stories from their pasts, and discussed plans for improving other areas of the house. Daniel realized that this partnership extended beyond chores. It had become a collaboration built on trust and understanding. Mara's presence brought him joy, a feeling he had not associated with home life in years. Even the neighbors began to notice a change. Mrs. Thompson commented on how well the house was maintained and how cheerful Daniel seemed. "I think Mara has done more than just clean," she said. "She's made the whole atmosphere better." Daniel agreed silently, recognizing that Mara had transformed not only the physical space, but also the emotional environment of the home. Mara also began to notice changes in Daniel. He was less rigid, more open to suggestions, and willing to adapt his habits. He listened carefully when she proposed new ways of doing things, and even sought her advice on small matters he had previously handled alone. Mara appreciated this change, realizing that their relationship had grown into one of mutual respect and cooperation. One evening, while Daniel was reading in the living room, Mara quietly prepared tea and placed it on the table next to him. He looked up and smiled. "Thank you," he said softly. Mara shrugged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You don't always need to say thanks," she replied. "I just like making things easier for you." Mara had become more than a housekeeper. She was a trusted companion, someone who understood him and his needs without constant explanation. Over time, they developed small routines together. Morning chores were coordinated so that Daniel could focus on his work while Mara managed the home efficiently. Evenings were spent sharing small meals, discussing plans for the next day, or simply enjoying the quiet comfort of the house. These routines built a sense of harmony that Daniel had never experienced before. Mara also helped Daniel address deeper issues he had been avoiding. She encouraged him to maintain a balanced schedule, take breaks, and pay attention to his health. Daniel, who had always prioritized work over personal care, began to see the value of these small adjustments. Mara's guidance was firm but gentle, pushing him to improve without making him feel criticized. One afternoon, while reviewing a cluttered drawer in the study, Daniel asked Mara, "How do you know what's the best way to organize everything?" "It's about understanding what you use and what matters. Things should be easy to find and easy to use. If you think ahead, it all becomes simple." Their bond continued to grow through these small, everyday interactions. Mara's honesty, once intimidating, became a source of guidance. Daniel began to appreciate her ability to see what others overlooked, to act decisively, and to care deeply without needing praise. He realized that her strength and independence complemented his own tendencies, creating a balance he had not known he needed. One evening, after a long day, Daniel found Mara in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. He watched her for a moment, noticing the care with which she arranged the plates, the way she adjusted the lighting, and the small touches that made the meal inviting. He felt a deep sense of gratitude. Mara's presence had transformed his home into a space of comfort and peace. He approached her quietly. "You've changed this house," he said, "and me too. I didn't realize how much I needed this." Mara had not imposed herself on him. She had worked alongside him, improving the environment and teaching him lessons in patience, trust, and care. Their relationship had evolved into a partnership built on respect, understanding, and shared goals. Over the following weeks, Daniel and Mara continued to refine their routines. The house functioned smoothly, with both of them contributing ideas and solutions. They learned to anticipate each other's needs, communicate efficiently, and support one another. The home had become a place of collaboration rather than conflict, thanks to Mara's guidance and Daniel's growing openness. Even simple tasks became opportunities for connection. Cooking together, sorting laundry, or organizing shelves became moments of shared purpose and laughter. Daniel realized that the home had become a place of warmth, trust, and mutual understanding, something he had never experienced before. Through these daily interactions, Daniel came to a profound realization. Mara, the woman he had once considered a fierce outcast, was not only competent but also deeply insightful and caring. Her unconventional personality, which had initially seemed challenging, was precisely what made her the perfect fit. She brought order, energy, and harmony to his life in ways he had never imagined. By the end of this period, Daniel understood that Mara's value extended far beyond her skills as a housekeeper. She had become a partner in life, someone whose strength, insight, and care enriched his daily existence. The initial tension and friction had transformed into a bond of trust, respect, and mutual growth. For the first time, Daniel felt truly at ease in his home. The house was not just clean and organized. It was a reflection of the harmony between two people who had learned to understand, respect, and support each other. Mara's fierce independence and honesty had become a source of guidance and comfort, teaching Daniel that true strength often comes from those who challenge us, push us to grow, and care without expecting anything in return. As he sat quietly one evening, watching Mara organize the living room, Daniel realized that the journey had changed him as much as it had changed the household. He had learned patience, trust, and the value of collaboration. He had discovered that people who seem different, bold, or unconventional can bring the greatest positive impact. Mara had not just fit into his life, she had completed it in ways he could not have anticipated.